Welcome back to the Top Notch Documentaries YouTube channel. In today's Israel Keys video, I should be going over the abduction and murder of Samantha Koenig. Some details have been left out given the graphic nature of the crime. I hope you enjoy. The Common Grounds Coffee Shack sits on Tudor Road in Anchorage, Alaska. The coffee shack is in the parking lot of the Alaska Club, a fitness centre, still standing to this very day, and its public location is right next to a busy main road. The shack looks like the last place that a kidnapping would ever take place, even at night. However, as one serial killer's killing spree was nearing an end, the coffee shack's location ceased to matter to the offender. He wanted the person inside it. Israel Keys was losing control. The publicity from his crimes was getting to him, and his life appeared to be falling apart. He would frequently not turn up to work for clients and was drinking heavily daily. When he did show up to work, the smell of alcohol and the vacancy in his eyes really emphasised his depressive mood and lack of life. Alaska had likely been the downfall of Keys, being so far north and having to contend with the long winters, paired with not having access to easy victims from the lower 48. Keys would admit that his crimes became more frequent after his move up to Alaska. Originally moving up because of his relationship to Kimberly, I'm sure that Keys couldn't have anticipated how the move would destroy his self-protective rules and lead to his eventual capture. Somewhere along the line following the move, his relationship didn't appear to be working out. He admitted to the mother of his child that him and his girlfriend hadn't been intimate in a year. The relationship clearly wasn't working, and Keys' priorities overrided any real effort to try to fix it. He wanted to move down to the lower 48 and become a travelling contractor. Easy, more regular access to victims, and he wouldn't need to travel via plane as much. I assume that this would mean that he would break off the relationship and leave Alaska with his daughter. During the phone call with his ex, he said that the main reason that he chose to get up every day was because of his daughter. The years of harming others and drinking to cope with the life that he had chosen to lead was clearly destroying his existence. It was only a matter of time before he would act out on his violent urges again. Sometime in early 2011, Keys had decided to break his own rule of doing something close to home. Well, technically not just yet. In May of 2011, just prior to flying out to the East Coast, he had staked out a parking lot and he nearly utilised a silencer that he had recently finished building. Fortunately, the plan crumbled and Keys didn't pull the trigger. I've heard some encounters with Keys in remote parking areas around this time, but it doesn't seem like he actually went ahead with any of those plans. Still, his rule of not committing crimes close to home, following the Deschutes River assault sometime in 1997 or 1998, was soon to be broken. And I just wanted to point out here that Keys may have already broken this rule. His word isn't always to be believed after all. Evidently, Keys wanted to take someone in Alaska. The stakeouts of different areas and his inability to control himself was only going to collide. It was only a matter of time. Following the Earthquake Park plan that Keys talked about, he had purchased a radio scanner to monitor police activity so that he wouldn't run into any unexpected arrivals in future crimes. He did admit that it did take the fun out of the stakeout. This purchase came sometime in October or November of 2011, and Keys was clearly preparing to put it to some use close to home in the future. Late January, early February of 2012 rolled around, and Keys must have had a major change in his abduction plan, because he went from stating that he would do his thing in the parking lot in the May 2011 plan to deciding to take a victim back to his shed 9 months later. He'd outfitted it with heaters, a mattress and a radio to blur out potential victim screams. Why take a victim so close? To his girlfriend, daughter and neighbours. His two lives would collide, and they were home at the time. Not like with the parking lot stakeout. They were both conveniently out that evening. The Samantha Koenig abduction seems impulsive, and a case of need-driven behaviour, fueled by desire, rather than a clearly thought-out abduction. Keyes was leaving Alaska the following day, and like with all the known Keyes victims, Keyes left the area immediately following the crime. Keyes had monitored traffic in the area and scoped out the coffee shack from a distance the days prior leading up to Samantha's abduction. It was open later than the other coffee shacks around Anchorage, and mostly young women worked in the shacks. Still, the risk of being seen and the unforeseen events really made this location a bizarre choice for an abduction. Why the movement away from a remote Alaskan parking lot, surrounded by places to hide, to a parking lot right in the open, next to a busy road? Keyes had parked his truck in the Home Depot parking lot across the street, and had walked along Tudor Road, his eyes fixated on the coffee shack. He kept a distance from the shack so as to not get caught on camera and to avoid looking suspicious. Days after the stakeout and Keyes returned to Tudor Road to do something at the coffee shack, he seemed to go through the motions rather than deciding on a select plan, letting his gut tell him what to do. Much like in June 2011, when he had wanted to carjack a man, but then settled on kidnapping Bill and Lorraine Currier from their home. He masked up and left his truck in the Home Depot parking lot that he'd parked in just days prior. His truck blended in Anchorage, where there are many identical looking trucks. Keyes had removed distinguishing features from his truck and had hidden his license plate with snow. As Keyes exited his truck and began the walk over to the coffee shack, he likely knew what to expect from the situation. One person working inside and likely a lone woman. Keyes knew the timing would be crucial, and he was greeted by Samantha Koenig at the window, and he ordered an Americano. But as Samantha prepared the coffee with her back turned to the window, Keyes concealed a handgun. When Samantha turned back to hand Keyes the coffee, he aimed the handgun at her and stated this is a robbery. Samantha froze up and Keyes demanded that she cut off the lights. Samantha complied with Keyes, believing this to be a robbery. Keyes vaulted through the window into darkness and restrained Samantha with zip ties, stealing money from the register. Her submissive behaviour and fearful demeanour may have fueled him into actually kidnapping her. When Keyes made up his mind on something, he seemed to do it. When he decided to go through with kidnapping Bill and Lorraine Currier, he jumped through hoops just to break into their secure home. He almost entered a mind state where no matter the obstacle, he was going to get what he wanted. Despite Samantha not having a vehicle nearby, Keyes made the decision to kidnap her and transport her in his truck. He had wanted to kidnap her boyfriend, whom was due to pick her up soon, but decided against it. Too many unknowns. She followed his orders as they left the shack, and he kept her close, sticking his handgun into her side. As they walked, he made the comment that the gun had quiet ammo. He wanted it to appear like they were a young couple to anyone who may have been watching. As they walked down Tudor Road, Samantha made a last-minute attempt to flee from Keyes. Much like with Lorraine Currier, Keyes put an end to the escape and threatened Samantha again. His terminology and the threat of the use of his handgun prevented Samantha from resisting Keyes' commands again. Keyes would say that he was going to hurt her rather than kill her, implying that Samantha might get out of the ordeal alive, comply with the captor and live. Keyes never had that in mind. I knew from the minute she walked out of that coffee stand, she wasn't going to live. On reaching his truck, Samantha was restrained inside, and Keyes must have decided on a ransom plan by this point, because he asked Samantha if she had a debit card and a phone. The card was in Samantha and her boyfriend's shared car at her residence, and the phone was left in the coffee shack. Keyes told Samantha that she was being held for ransom and kept monitoring the radio scanner for reports of himself being mentioned. There were none. Fully under Keyes' control, Samantha sat restrained in his truck as he drove around Anchorage. They ended up at a Walmart, and Keyes thought about buying a burner phone for the ransom. This could mean that he was never planning on returning to the crime scene for Samantha's phone. However, he didn't know if her family would buy the ransom from a random number, and so decided to return to the coffee shack to retrieve her phone and car keys. Keyes retrieved both of these and cleared up anything that may have looked suspicious, despite everything being caught on camera. He returned to his truck, where Samantha had been left. As mentioned, Samantha was compliant to Keyes, and he texted Samantha's boyfriend, playing along with the argument theme that they had been having through their previous messages. Samantha suddenly made the comment that she needed to pee, and Keyes accepted despite being angry about her speaking up. As he drove towards Earthquake Park, staked out in 2011, Keyes smoked a cigar and shared it with Samantha. On finishing her business, Samantha was once again restrained in Keyes' truck. He then drove to a gas station and pumped gas before driving back to his residence. The timing element worked for Keyes here also, as he led Samantha, who was blindfolded, into his shed and restrained her. He really played into the whole ransom idea. It was now 1 or 2 a.m. Turning up the radio, playing heavy metal music, which he was known to show up to work in Near Bay playing, drowned out potential screams. Keyes needed the debit card and mentioned that he'd be back, but had to complete the ransom steps. Samantha once again complied and sat restrained in the shed. A rope secured around her neck had been drilled into the shed wall. Keyes asked where Samantha lived and printed out her address on MapQuest. It was around 2:30 a.m. He drove his girlfriend's Nissan Extra 3 or 4 blocks away from the residence and walked over to the shared vehicle. Opening the car door, he grabbed Samantha's boyfriend's debit card, 2 cards for the same shared PIN, and fled. At the time that this was going on, her boyfriend had confronted Keyes outside, yelling at him, not realising that her strange disappearance was actually related to the theft. He didn't call the police. Keyes then went ahead and used the card at an ATM. However, he didn't have the PIN number. Shockingly, he went back to his shed, asked Samantha for the PIN number, and went back to the ATM to test out the card. The balance was only 94 cents. Keyes made it back to his residence and poured some wine. He checked on his girlfriend, who was by now asleep, and took a purple scarf from his bedroom and put on a headlamp. Keyes returned to the shed and removed the screws from the walls. Samantha asked if the ransom was working out okay, and Keyes said that it was. Lay down on the mat on your stomach. Samantha complied, and Keyes used the purple scarf as a gag. He placed a thick cable tie around her neck and removed her clothing with a black folding knife, placing her clothing into a trash bag where some of her possessions were already. Keyes raped Samantha as songs on the radio played. The sexual assault took maybe 2 or 3 songs, Keyes would later say. Wearing leather gloves, same routine as when he murdered Lorraine Currier, Keyes squeezed the zip-tie tight around Samantha's neck, and as she slowly suffocated, he stuck the knife into her back, below her right shoulder blade. Samantha now deceased, he went back to his house, showered and got ready for his vacation. Around this time, he placed Samantha's body in a plastic tarp and put her body into a filing cabinet, her body staying frozen in the Alaskan winter. Keyes double-locked his shed and called a taxi at 5 a.m. to travel with his daughter to the airport. He made the comment that he was running late. He had murdered Samantha about an hour prior to the taxi call, and that was the murder of Samantha Koenig. Samantha Koenig's murder recording has never been released, and it's unlikely that it ever will. Whatever was on that tape must have been worse than the Courier murder confession. If it did ever get released, I can safely say that I wouldn't want to have to hear it. Rest in peace to Samantha Koenig. This has been another Israel Keys video. As always, thanks for watching.